Hey guys, Besa Gordon here. It's time for another episode of Rewind with Besa, and there's been a lot going on in the criminal sector of Washington State, so I'm actually really excited for this interview. Although it was actually scheduled earlier this month, it's happening at the perfect time, okay? We have U.S. Attorney for Western Washington, Nick Brown, with us, and we're going to talk about some of the drug issues going on, some of the plans that he has, and just also what others need to know and look out for, and in general, some clarification. So check this out. We're going to jump right into this interview as soon as we finish this intro. Doing?
I'm good.
Good?
Yeah.
I'm pretty good. And the sun's out today.
Sun is out.
Now,
day.
What's funny is, like, I was looking at the sun earlier and I was like, oh, I don't need a coat. And so then I'm waiting on I was waiting on my Uber and was like, who told me that?
Yeah, no, that sun
I put this coat on so quick. Speaking of this coat, do you like Kraken? Like, do you ever go to the Kraken
I went to
games?
the first game. That's why I
You
ran
did?
into Omari.
Oh, shut up.
Yeah.
That
They
is
had
so
a,
cool. That's the game that it was.
They had a Black History Month, yeah.
Okay. Where the heck was I at?
February 16, 17, something like that.
Wow, because I was there that day. Who knows where I was at?
That was good. I hadn't been in Climate Pledge or been to the Kraken match or game, so it was good.
See, that's dope. And like, that was actually my first ever hockey game also. So I was like, okay, I finally get to see what it's all about. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of a baseball vibe, just with how the people are there. They're all mingling, they're having fun. But Seahawk fans, it's like I don't know, they're very serious.
That's like a
you know what I mean?
Sport. Yeah, when you're on the field or in the stands.
It's a little different. So I actually really enjoyed the Kraken. I'm going to like today's game or whatever have you. But I just want to ask about that because I'm always curious to see like who goes to the Kraken games because a lot of people that look like us typically don't actually go, but more are starting to come.
The Kraken's doing real good with representation and the people that work for the Kraken.
Yeah.
You know, they got a Black general counsel. They got Black people up and down there, like important positions, which I didn't know about until I went to that game in February. I was like, oh, okay. Like,
they're actually really doing their part, and apparently only, 14 teams actually have that National Black Hockey Day.
Oh, okay.
And we just happen to be one of them. And I'm like, okay, Washington.
Yeah. I got the Black broadcaster, I was like, that was good. And I don't really know the sport that well, so it was fun to watch. But I got a lot to learn about the sport itself, but it's good for the city to have it here.
I love that. Now, okay, before we get into like serious topics, I definitely want to know a little bit more about you. Obviously, you are a huge U.S. attorney. Like, it's a pretty big deal to be in the position that you're in, especially being that you were appointed by our current president. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know, like, when you were in elementary, were you like that kid that was always arguing with everybody and your parents were like, yeah, I know what you're going to do when you get older?
No, I wasn't. That's a good question. I wasn't really thinking about being a lawyer really until towards the end of college.
Really?
So I grew up in Pierce County. My father was stationed at Fort Lewis, JBLM. So I'm a local native down there. I went to public schools all the way through high school. But I didn't think about being a lawyer or doing legal work. I wanted to do government stuff, and I liked politics and policy as I was getting older. But when I went to college, this was not on my radar at all.
Really?
I was always active and engaged, doing like student government and that kind of thing. But I never saw myself as a litigator or anything like that until much later.
Interesting. So, okay, what was it that actually sparked it in you to want to be an attorney? Because it's not like you were like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna like do normal. I'm just gonna open up my own law firm and just do. Hey, if you need an attorney, let me know. Put my face on a bus. Like, you went straight to the top.
Well, I didn't go straight to the top.
Well, yes, that is true.
It took me a long time to get here.
It was a process.
So when I went off to Morehouse from here, I went there on an Army ROTC scholarship. So I was committed to serve active duty in the Army at some point when I was getting out of college. I think probably my junior year at Morehouse, I started thinking, what's the way I want to serve in the military? The Army all the branches have the JAG Corps, so you can serve as an Army lawyer. So that's when I really started thinking maybe I want to go to law school. And that plus my interest in doing government work, policy work, politics, all that kind of thing. There's a lot of lawyers who, that's their path to engage in those sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
So law school seemed like a natural approach for me. And then when I got into the JAG Corps, I spent about 9 months or so doing family law, helping soldiers and their families navigate, a bunch of small family issues. And then I had an opportunity. I ran the Army Tax Center, so I was running everybody's like income taxes, which in the Army,
all in their business.
Yeah. But it's a kind of viewed as a grunt job. Like nobody really wants to do that, taxes. But when you do that job, then you get an opportunity to sort of choose what you want to do next. Usually.
Oh. So it's like a different kind of springboard.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, all right, you did this sacrifice. Where do you want to go next in your Army legal career? And just looking around, I was down at Fort Bliss, Texas, which is in El Paso, and sort of looking around the opportunities. I said, well, let me try criminal. And so I went into doing criminal defense for the Army, so defending soldiers who get accused of crimes in the military. And I loved it. Like I walked into the courtroom, I was energized. I was representing, mostly young men and women accused of crimes. And they come to you and they put their liberty in your hands.
Literally.
And they're looking for help, And I love talking to juries. I love talking to judges. And I was like, all right, this is where I belong. This is where I feel comfortable. So I did 2 years of criminal defense, 1 year in El Paso, and then I deployed to Baghdad in 2005.
Ooh.
Spent a year over there in Iraq defending soldiers.
How was that? Even though like you weren't necessarily fighting, but what was it like to just be there?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I remember when I called my parents. I said, "I'm thinking about volunteering for this duty." They're like, "No,
They're like, wait,
you can't volunteer to go."
Okay, you're not telling me that you're sending you. You are sending yourself.
Well, they were looking for people who wanted to go do criminal defense work.
Yeah,
and so I raised my hand to go over there.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of, like, personally and professionally, it's one of the most impactful years of my life.
Wow.
So you're in the middle of a war zone. I wasn't fighting, but I was carrying my weapon everywhere. I was traveling via Humvee or helicopter all throughout the city in Baghdad and outside of Baghdad, defending soldiers, so they're in their day jobs going out and fighting and putting their lives on the line, and then many of them getting in trouble and needed help. So we've tried full-on jury trials in the middle of Baghdad during the middle of this war, and 2005 was a serious year in that battle and that fight. And I was with good people, like some of my closest friends. One of them was just in town last week. Like,
oh, nice.
People I met over there. And but that's where I really just fell in love with that work and realized that, like, my skill set was best suited to be helping people, to be on my feet, and trying to do good, And
so would you say going over there actually helped you find your why?
Well, certainly,
yeah,
certainly part of it. I mean, joining the Army and being in the courtroom, I was like, light bulb went off.
Yeah.
Like, this is where my talents. Like, I'm a good lawyer, but lawyers can be good in lots of different ways, right?
Fair.
You can be a great writer. You can be a great private practitioner. I was meant, at least at that time, to be in the courtroom. I felt like this is what excites me, and it felt meaningful and relevant. Like every day I was doing something that was impacting somebody's life. And so trying to find where you can thrive was important for me. So I did 2 years of criminal defense. I came back to Fort Lewis in 2006 and then switched to doing prosecution. And I was like, all right, this is what I want to do. I want to do trial work for a while.
How different does it feel when you're like, okay, you're doing defense and now you're doing prosecution? Like, does it feel different, or is it just a different strategy for you?
It's both. I mean, it's a different job, right? If you're a criminal defense lawyer, like, your almost exclusive obligation is to help that individual. They have been accused of a crime. They have rights under the law to the best representation possible. So you are helping that individual. My job as a prosecutor is to represent the people, right? So when I was an Army prosecutor, I was there on behalf of the United States. When I left the Army and came to be a line prosecutor in the office that I now lead, every time I would go to court, I would say, I'm Nicholas Brown on behalf of the United States of America. And so you think about your job differently. You're thinking about the system. You're thinking about the victims of crimes or alleged crimes. You're thinking about how do you do justice and what does that look like? These are things that defense lawyers think about, but their obligation is to do whatever they can in the interest of their client. Whereas as prosecutors, we're thinking holistically about what does it mean for the community to be safe, and how do you do justice? And so the job changes dramatically.
So let me ask you this. So did your thing, got to where you are now, and we have this crazy drug problem that is happening here in Washington State. And as I've done my research, I'm like, so this is even worse than I thought. Then I was watching like the news and I was like, wait, this just happened today? I was like, oh yeah, we have to talk about this on Friday. So let me pull out some notes really quick. Basically, after a 1-year investigation, it looks like it was 10 SWAT teams, 350 law enforcement officers, and you guys seized 1.9 million doses of fentanyl, 230 pounds of methamphetamine, and over 200 firearms. Now, this is something that you ended up saying in the press release that day after the sting was pretty much done. And I'm curious to know, when something like this happens and you are in the position that you're in, does this feel like a win or does it not feel like a win because you know that all this stuff got into not only our country, but our state?
Yes and yes. So first of all, I mean, we can talk about fentanyl the entire time, probably,
Yeah.
but fentanyl is a very unique problem and different, at least from my perspective, than some of the other drug trends that we've seen. It's different for a few different reasons. One, it's incredibly deadly. And we've seen overdoses throughout the country, here in King County in particular, at record highs. And so we know that people, and a lot of kids, a lot of young people, are dying from this drug. So it's incredibly lethal, incredibly deadly. It's incredibly easy and cheap to make because it's largely synthetic. So you just need a chemical compound to make this drug. People are doing that at home in their pill presses. They're doing it in Mexico.
Wow.
And it doesn't require a natural resource supply like many or most other drugs do. So the ability for large organizations to make massive amounts of fentanyl makes it so easy to get into our streets. So you think about that combination of deadly and easy to do, like we're dealing with something different here.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that in the data. And so when we have a case like this, where we've seized and taken a lot of fentanyl and meth and coke and other drugs off the streets, I mean, I know that saves lives, right? DEA spoke at that press conference, and the way that they measure the lethality of doses, the special agent in charge of DEA said that's enough fentanyl to kill everybody in Seattle and in Tacoma and another 500,000 people.
Yes.
Now, not that many people would have died had that all gone the streets, but more people would have died.
You could distribute it to that point to where that could happen, or just move it across the state lines.
Right. And so I know we do a case like that, we've saved lives. We've seized 230, I think, firearms total, mostly AR-15 assault rifles that are killing people. You know, we saw a tragic murder in Tennessee of children earlier this week. So to take those guns off the streets, that is meaningful. We think most of those guns were bound for Mexico to use by the drug cartels down there, and Mexico is dealing with incredibly high levels of violence. So I know that saves lives. On the same time, like, I'm realistic. Like, we are scratching the surface on the overall problem, and the way that we're going to solve this problem is not just through prosecutors and not just through law enforcement. And part of the struggle I have, because I think we're a good tool in the overall challenge that we have around drugs and other types of crime. But when people in the public get worried about crime, like, they too often rely on law enforcement and prosecutor, where there's all these other things that people need to be thinking about, like, how do we create safe and healthy communities? And so this creates space, and that's how I kind of think of my role as the U.S. attorney, as prosecutors. We are a tool to create space for all these other things in the community to build up a safe and healthy community. And so, you know, this is good. This is progress. This is a win for, I think, community safety, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more that needs to be done. And even if I put every single person on my team just on doing fentanyl, it's still not enough.
It's still not enough.
Prosecution in prison is not the answer to solving these problems. So,
and that's like the unfortunate thing about it, because it's like, the question ends up being like, do people actually want the help, or do they just actually want the drug so that way they don't have to think about what they're going through? Yeah. You know, like, there was this one lady that I saw on the news, and she was saying that she has lupus, so that's why she uses the oxy pills, but those can easily get mixed with fentanyl, or those are the blues, right?
Yep.
And so when it comes down to the people like herself that aren't necessarily able to see a regular doctor, and then they go out on the street and grab these. So yeah, I definitely can see how that's a win, because a lot of times they're going to do the drugs anyways.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was with fentanyl being so like just heavily distributed, not just around Washington, but around the entire world in the States, why don't we have the test strips here? I saw that it was illegal in Washington.
That's a good question, and I don't want to get too far afield because there's a state system and state laws and what the feds do, and I know the policymakers in Olympia and elsewhere are thinking about all the various approaches. So the availability of test strips, I know, is hot button for people, but I'll just say that's a little out of my purview and my pay grade. It's certainly, as we talk about the drug issues, I know that's something that comes up a lot, but it's not something I can specifically do or address.
So in your, at least to your knowledge, outside of even this thing that we just had earlier this week, how are the drugs getting here? And do we have an idea of who is actually pushing these out to the streets, especially the youth?
Oh, yeah. So
when I found out that kids were doing it in high school, I was like, wait, what? Yeah. How are they even getting this?
Well, I mean, and so for our work as federal prosecutors, 99% of the work that we do is focused on the large-scale distributors. So that is, right now, mostly Mexican-based drug cartels. And though there's cartels in Mexico that are flooding the country with drugs, and that's just the reality. We don't prosecute folks on the street, with small levels unless there's something uniquely dangerous about them or some prior history. Like, most of our work is organizations that are bringing the drugs into the community. In this case, we just had on Monday, it was cartel based, but they were distributing here through a Aryan Nation prison gang association, which that in and of itself was unique for us.
I wasn't ready for that part. That was the shoe.
Yeah, no, I mean, the lead defendant in that case, and I should say, like, those are just allegations. Those people will have their day in court. But the lead defendant in that case, like, he's in my hometown. Wow. Where he was before we arrested him. And that's a small town in Pierce County, and here he is leading a massive organization. But the drugs are coming into the country. They're coming across the border. They're coming through SeaTac. So people will bring suitcases full of drugs through SeaTac.
They're finding a way to get them through.
Yeah. They're coming through the mail. People are mailing containers through the Postal Service or through FedEx, through the mail. In Washington, we get a lot on the water. You get up to the Canadian-American border. There's boats that get seized. We had a good case last year where we seized a bunch of drugs right off the border, meth and fentanyl. And so drugs or cartels are relying on, just usually semi-traffic or car traffic through the border down at Mexico, Arizona, Texas, California, but they're coming in from everywhere. And so that's when I think about how do we solve the problem. We're not going to stop all that.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to address the
like coming from too many different directions at this point.
But to get to your point, like the people who have medical needs or perceived medical needs, or they start with something small and they get addicted on something else, like unless we're addressing that root cause problem, we're going to continue to get the influx because it's easy to get across the border. It's easy to mail to the state. We're on the I-5 corridor from California and Mexico, so we get a lot here, but it comes up here and spreads out all throughout the country. So we really have to do a holistic approach to addressing some of these problems because, kids are dying. Like high schoolers, middle schoolers are dying. Earlier this year, I went to a meeting with a bunch of families of victims. And they're teenage kids, mostly, we all went through high school. You start experimenting with things and you think it's innocent. And then you get a pill because your buddy has a pill and he tells you it's one thing. And you might think it is, but then it's laced with a little bit of fentanyl. And it takes, drops of sand basically to be laced into that pill. And you might end up dead.
That's like the scariest thing ever. And, sometimes like even with just like a marijuana type thing, my friends are like, oh, I'm like, where did you even get it from? You know what I mean? Like you just
better go to a safe retail store.
It's hard to even trust that these days to where it's gotten to that point. What effects are you seeing on the community that you actually even grew up in right now when it comes to this?
We've had tragedies like everywhere else, and I'm thinking where I grew up in this Aryan Nation guy, and that's a whole nother story. But I have friends who I grew up with who had drug problems. I have friends now who have kids in those same schools who are dealing with issues. Now I live in West Seattle, and I've been hearing about problems in the middle school and high school, kids doing drugs and it's important for people to think about fentanyl as different because it's not just in certain communities or certain neighborhoods. I guarantee there are kids in every school in Seattle who are doing fentanyl and bringing fentanyl in. And this is a universal problem, and it's not a problem that is only limited to one area or one community or one people. Like all the kids are doing it these days, or doing something they think is innocent that has to be touched. But so when I go across this district, and I represent our home district of Seattle, but it's all up to the border and down to Canada, to Oregon. This is everywhere. It's in every community. Every law enforcement officer I talk to, they're talking about it. Every community group I talk to, they're worried about it. So this feels different, and I think that's borne out by the data and the facts that we're seeing.
So, things. I like having interviews like
we got to talk about something positive too,
well, yeah, we definitely have to talk about something positive. I was like, I just want to get through these things and move forward on life. I like doing interviews like this because they're informative, but it definitely makes me sad because it almost feels like, I don't want to say there's no hope, but it's like you said, you're just scratching the surface right about now. So it's like there's so much more to do. Do you have any plans that you're able to share of what your office is doing to kind of clean the streets up a little bit more, or at least make it more safe for the youth?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing everything we can to bring the most important cases that we can and to have the biggest impact. So at least on the drug work, we are heavily engaged in trying to get as high up in the food chain of drug organizations as we can, and that, again, I think we can get up high, we can dismantle some of these organizations, but it's going to take all these other pieces to really make it sustainable. And there are so many things that I think we should think about as criminal justice issues that have nothing to do with prosecutors.
Fair.
Housing, education, an economy that works for people, that is sustainable, because people tend to find their way to drug abuse because they don't have somewhere to live.
Yeah.
And they're out in the street and they're surrounded by people who are struggling and looking for an escape. So when we think about the housing crisis that we have in Seattle in particular, that is directly related to our drug issues.
Yeah.
When people don't have a job to pay for things, they start doing things that are illegal, and that spreads the drug crisis. If people aren't smart and educated and have community programs that are sustainable for a place that kids go to after school, they start looking at other things.
Yeah.
And so, we're thinking about how do we make this community safe? How do we improve all the issues here in Seattle or every city in America? Law enforcement is a piece. And as I said earlier, we can create space, we can do a bust like this, and that slows down the flow. But unless all these other pieces are coming into the picture in a really meaningful, sustained investment, we're going to be back. And we'll keep doing cases like this until we get serious about all these other pieces of the structure.
So you are also Civil Rights Project. What is it? What is your involvement? Give us the spiel.
Yeah, sure. So, civil rights is one of the big priorities of the Department of Justice. When the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, first came in, there's 3 things that he's set forth as priorities, and he is my boss. So, he talked about keeping the community safe, so addressing violent crime, some of these drug issues, reestablishing the rule of law, and so people have some trust in the system, and trust has been down in the system for a host of good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that we can do to be transparent and according to the rules, I think people build more faith in the system. But then civil rights, and for me, that resonates for a whole host of reasons. One is the Department of Justice was solely created to address civil rights post-Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
That is the reason the Department of Justice exists. There was an Attorney General, but it was created to protect the rights of newly and freed Black Americans and enforce the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And so as I think about my role now as the public face of the Department of Justice in this community, if I'm not talking about civil rights every day, then I'm doing something wrong, and I'm not upholding that legacy and that mission. And so we do civil rights cases in my office. We've been doing it for years. When people are discriminated against by, in their jobs, in their places of worship, in their schools, in housing, we bring civil rights cases on behalf of the Department of Justice. Voting rights issues is a big priority. So that work has been going on for a long time, but it also ebbs and flows with administrations. And this administration is really focused on civil rights in a way that we may not have seen in the prior administration. But under that rubric, the U.S. attorney community, so there's U.S. attorneys like me across the country, we have subcommittees that work on particular issues, and I chair the civil rights subcommittee for all the U.S. attorneys. And so I'm meeting with U.S. attorneys across the country to talk about what's the best practices that we can do, what are you guys doing to raise awareness around civil rights issues, how are we engaging with the community to learn from them about what are the priorities in their areas. And there's really good team building around those issues. We meet fairly regularly, either online or in person. We just had a meeting in Alabama last month in conjunction with the Selma March anniversary. So I led that group down to Alabama. We did the Selma March. We went to Montgomery and met with some of the leaders down there.
Wow.
And Montgomery, I'd never been before. That was mind-blowing for me. The history, the legacy there. We went to the courthouse where...
How did the vibe feel down there?
Well, the South is different, you know.
I would just think that the energy would just be something over
yeah,
there.
I mean, it's both inspiring. It's a little bit sad, and I'll say that for a few different. So we went to Selma, and you see the images of Selma on the news. I'd seen people march over that bridge for years. You go back and watch the Selma movie, you get a sense of what that city is like.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't changed much.
Really?
You go down to like downtown Selma, it is poor, it is segregated, it is underdeveloped. It looks and feels, in my mind, like it did 50 years ago.
Wow.
And I wasn't quite ready for that. People would say that to me. And then when you're standing at the base of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, knowing that John Lewis and C.T. Vivian and all these black heroes, these icons that you read about in books, like they stood on that bridge in 1965, literally willing to put their lives on the line so black folks had the right to vote and had economic opportunity. And you cannot help but stand there and be humbled, but also a little bit saddened that it's 2023. We're still talking about voting rights,
That part.
And I was just
Especially
reading
over in Mississippi.
Yeah, but not just in Mississippi. Like, this is an issue across the country. Like, Washington is pretty good around voting. Universal vote by mail is a really good system in my view. But all across the country, there are policymakers trying to limit the right to people to vote. I was just reading an article yesterday about people trying to pass bills to take polling stations away from college campuses. Why?
What?
Yeah. Now, I don't want
You don't want the youth vote?
They don't want the youth to vote because the youth vote in a certain way. And, they're reducing polling opportunities. They're trying to reduce mail-in voting. And we should be thinking about exactly the opposite. Like, how do we expand voting?
Yeah.
How do we get as many people involved in voting? Like, in Washington, again, I think we're pretty good, but we can do more. And so, like, the work that we have in 2023, it is different. Like, it's not 1965. I don't want to try to compare. But the same sort of big picture priorities that John Lewis and others were literally putting their life on the line for, we're still dealing with those. And then to go into Montgomery, we did a long visit to the Legacy Museum, which is Brian Stevenson's project, and the Lynching Museum, the Memorial for Peace and Justice. And so you go to the Legacy Museum, which tracks the history of transnational slavery all the way through mass incarceration. You can't walk out of there and feel nothing but the weight of it. And you see in that museum the jars of sand that they recover from all the places where people have lynched. So they go to the trees where people have lynched, and they dig up the earth, and they put it in jars, and you walk into this room, and there's just hundreds of jars of sand where black folks were killed. And that's deep, right? And then he traces the narrative to how that impacts our current policies. And so I walked out of there like, all right, we got to be committed to this work. And we're having that dialogue with all the other U.S. attorneys down there. And it was sad and depressing, but also inspiring because people came out of that like, there was U.S. attorneys from here, but also from Idaho and Montana and Mississippi and all these places where I think they have more work to do than we do here in Washington. And so to know that we were impacting the way that they were thinking about leading that office was super important for me and super impactful.
Wow. Well, shoot. Let's lighten the conversation a little bit.
No problem.
The sand threw me. I was like, okay.
I'm just saying, let me say one last thing. Everybody should find their way to Montgomery to go to the Legacy Museum to see that and to talk and meet with Brian Stevenson about these issues was super powerful.
Definitely going to have to get down there. And I feel like there's never going to be a time that I will be ready But I mean, they weren't ready and they had to deal with it. So
Right,
I think
exactly.
me just going there, I can figure that out.
Get a good night's sleep, walk in and experience it. It's worth doing.
What is getting a good night's sleep anymore? I'll nap on the plane. We are literally on our way back from Vegas. We had an amazing trip. Got some good interviews coming up for you guys, so definitely stay locked for that.
Look like water on my island. Long way from running from the siren. I've been hella fly, I'm a pilot. I get what I want if I like it. Like it, yeah. If I like it. If I like it, yeah. If I like it.
What's up, Bird Media in the building? You know what I'm saying?
We're gonna have to come back to Vegas real soon because it's really lit. So let me ask you this. Okay. There is, I want to say it was an Australian company, right? And they ended up making meatballs out of woolly mammoth cells. They're saying that this is like the future of food. And with like
You throwing me off with this.
Hey, I
Go
said
ahead,
we were
go ahead,
gonna
go
lighten
ahead,
it
go
up.
ahead.
I said we were lightening it up just a wee. So, a lot of people have been talking about like food crises, and people have definitely been trying to find different ways to like make food. And I have been seeing people making food out of like cultivated cells. So let me ask you this. Even if it wasn't the cultivated cells, would you ever eat woolly mammoth meatballs?
If it was FDA approved, I might think about it. If this was just some little company doing their thing on the side and trying to, I wouldn't go there. There's plenty of food to eat. I wouldn't touch that. But if the scientists and every folks said this is okay, I might.
I might
Life is too short to be worried about too many things. But,
little Costco sample size.
you never know. I go to Costco all the time, and I'm saying yes. I don't know what that is.
I sure don't. I'm like, smells good.
Oh, good.
I guess we'll just try it. If I don't like it, I'll toss it.
That's right.
So in other food news, I'm always curious to know, would you try the ranch ice cream? Did you hear about this debacle?
No, like ranch or like mayonnaise type desserts. That's wrong.
Like it's out of pocket, right?
It's
and there's
not.
there's a mac and cheese one too.
Yeah. This is not. You're mixing the wrong things together.
But here was my thing, because if it actually tastes like ranch, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, people were on TikTok and they were doing this challenge to see if they like it, but they were taking a like whole spoonful of it as if it was vanilla bean ice cream. And this was my thing. If I am at a barbecue or an office event and there's veggies, there's ranch, I'm not going to take the ranch and pour it in a bowl and just,
What I would say, like, I try to keep an open mind. I will try almost any food. But when it comes to like a dessert, like, my question is why? Like, you got all the good stuff. You got vanilla and chocolate and strawberries, and like, you don't need to mix these things. But I'll try almost anything at least once.
Okay, well, I've thought about trying it, but when someone said it was kind of sweet, I was like, okay, never mind, because I was gonna try it with like some buffalo wings or
I mean, I'm going to the Mariners game on Saturday, and
Yeah.
I was talking to my son about, because he and I are going together, and I was like, they sell crickets at the Mariners game. They've been doing it for years. They're the only place in the country that sells crickets. Yes, crickets. And because in other parts of the world, crickets are a common food. They're cheap. They got high protein. They're easy to cook. So they'd like fry up crickets like potato chips. So like insects, we're getting way off topic now here, Besa, but insects are a big part of the food chain in a lot of communities. Not in the United States, but you go in other parts of the world, Asia in particular. So I was telling him, you want to try, crickets? He's like, nah, I'm not touching that. We'll do some hot dogs or something,
Well, they do have like some new pizza spots there. They have like a lot of new food.
Oh, the food there is
like
great.
It was pretty
Yeah,
good. I
it's
was
on
like,
point.
okay, Chef Javier, you did your thing this season. You better. So, okay, curious for people that want to get in to, I mean, obviously where you're at right now, that's a huge journey, but just getting through law school. What advice do you have for them, especially for someone of color?
Yeah. Well, and those are two, I mean, they're related, obviously, but the dynamics that young attorneys of color face are different than white law students or young white lawyers. What I would say in general is, to me, like, the law is an incredibly powerful tool. And, like, you can go in and get your law degree, and you can do business, you can do the criminal work, you can go civil side, you can do family law, you can do immigration work, you can do civil rights. Like there's a myriad of things that you can do law with a law degree. You can do policy, you can do government, and so not practice. And, like if you go to med school and decide you don't want to be a doctor, like you wasted your money. You go to law school and decide I don't want to be a trial lawyer. There's still so many things that you can do.
Yeah.
And people have to experiment with what feels right to them and figure out, what's the right path for them and talk to people and find a mentor. And so a lot of advice for me for young lawyers is just ask a lot of questions, and so many young lawyers I meet or people in law school, like, I want to be an international business lawyer. Like, you don't know that. Like you too early.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds good. What does that mean? I don't even really know what that means. And so to try to think about like, what is the first 3 years going to be like? And I always tell people like, go somewhere with good people where you're going to learn a lot. And if you think in those like 3 to 5 year chunks, you're going to be all right. And, if you have to change course earlier in that, that's fine. But to try to make, think about the early things about what am I going to learn? Who am I going to work with? Is this a good place for me? And you're going to learn some skills there that you'll take on the next thing. But like, if you look at my career, I've been a lawyer for 20 years. I'm on my 5th legal job, and I'll have a 6th because this job is not forever. My career is not a straight path. I went from being an Army prosecutor to being a federal prosecutor to the governor's council to private practice to back here, and that's not a straight path. And so I just had to go places where I was learning a lot and working with good people and being open to the opportunities that came my way and the opportunities that I earned. And the other piece of that is just sort of be authentic to what you want to be. Like if you want to go be a lawyer because you want to make money, that's fine. Go make your money and be focused on the skills that you need to do that. But just to try to be authentic to who you are and where you want to have an impact. For me, it's always been government service and public service and trying to figure out how I can make a difference in the community. For Black lawyers or lawyers of color, particularly in a city that doesn't have many of us, role models and mentors and a support system is really, really important because you need people who have been through some of what you've been through, because you are going to operate in spaces where you're going to be one of a few or the only one, and you got to branch outside that network. And so all throughout my career, I've had people that I've looked up to, whether we were formal mentor, mentee, or just, old school folks that I had gotten to know, who I could look to and ask some questions. For me in this community, that's Judge Richard Jones, who was the first Black federal district judge in Seattle. That's James Williams, who's the managing partner at Perkins Coie here in Seattle. Jeff Robinson, who's a longtime defense lawyer and now works with the ACLU. And these are guys, I mean, they're older than me, but, they're in a generation that I can relate to and understand. And just to see them, what they're doing and the ability for me to ask them questions over the years, that's important for me. And Black lawyers, I think, have to advocate for themselves more strongly, more firmly than other lawyers do, because they're not going to find that support system in every environment.
And then also, I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on, my uncle used to always say, you should be an attorney. You always like to argue. And then my mom would be like, why? So she'd be held in contempt? She would never be at home. What advice do you have for lawyers that maybe always fall into that?
What I would say is, most of my best attorneys are not super argumentative. Like, they are focused on how do we make the law work? How do I interpret, analyze the law? How do I boil down my legal arguments in the plainest, simplest terms to talk to the judge or to talk to a jury? And if you get in court and you're just fighting and, throwing barbs, the jury's going to sit there and be like, you got to be likable, and people who argue a lot often aren't the most likable folks. We see TV portrayals or movie portrayals of what lawyers do, and we get into some heated conversations, but lawyers need to be thinking about, how do I analyze the law? How do I use that to further my client, whether it's an individual client or my client, the public, to advance the goals? And I've been a lawyer for 20 years. I don't like to argue with people.
Yeah.
I like to solve problems. And my approach is to be authentic to who I am and approach it with some kindness and some grace and some really well thought out legal arguments. And that's how I can be successful. So if you just want to find a career to fight, like, you can find that in the legal career, but your reputation is going to spread quickly, and that is not the most effective tool for most people. That's what I'll say.
And as you see, I decided to go on radio. I was like, Uncle, I see what you're saying, but no.
I mean, you can't, as a lawyer, you can't be afraid to have those fights. Like, if you're a lawyer and you don't like conflict, particularly as a litigator, that's not the right place for you. But if you think that fighting is going to solve the problems or be, in the benefit of your client, you're probably wrong.
That's fair. Now, okay, we're going to do 6 randoms with Besa. The questions are not crazy. They're just very, very random. And it also lets people get to know a little more about you. Okay. So for starters, your favorite locally owned restaurant?
Oof. I mean, this sounds a little bit canned, but I went to Communion the other day and like.
I did too.
The vibe was, like, the food was great, the service was great, the music was great. So that was the place I'm most excited about right now. The place I go most often is the taco truck down the street from my house.
You can never go wrong with a good taco truck.
Yeah, so, but like in terms of overall experience, Communion was great.
What'd you get?
Oh, it was like, I got the soul sushi or whatever they call, like
with the bowl.
Yeah,
I got that.
And there was a pork rib dish, so it was good.
Okay, so let me ask you this: have you ever gone to Pike Place Market and actually caught the fish?
No.
Would you ever do that?
Oh, for sure.
I don't know why. It kind of creeps me out.
I mean, but it's like the most quintessential Seattle thing.
I want to do it, but it's something. I don't know what it is.
I mean,
catching a big.
You're gonna smell like fish the rest of your day,
and
but
maybe that's the part that's in the back of my head where I'm just like, man, I'm just gonna have fish juice everywhere.
But I should try it one of these days.
Okay. So also, do you still go to the movie theaters after the pandemic, or are you like me, where you mainly watch them at home?
I mainly watch them at home, but I have 2 little kids, and they like going to the movies. And so most of the movies I've seen in the theater in the last couple of years have been kids' movies. I'm trying to think of the last grown-up movie I went to see. I saw Top Gun in the theater, but I've seen lots of kids' movies. Or I saw Avatar with my 10-year-old.
I still have to see the new.
It was
Avatar.
good, and you got to see that in the theater, like on your TV. It doesn't, like we did the whole
3D, and everything. I heard
we did all that. So that was like the last grown-up-ish movie that I saw in the theater.
What would you say has been your most rewarding moment throughout your career?
I've got 3, and I'll say them quickly together. On the pure like casework side, 2 cases, very different but same issues. When I was in Iraq, in Baghdad, I defended a young soldier from Louisiana National Guard, who was facing some very serious allegations in the middle of fighting the war. And I will remember defending that young man and getting as close to a win as we could probably hope for, and standing outside that courtroom in Baghdad in the middle of the night. The jury came back at 11 o'clock, and when the jury came back and gave the verdict, and him crying, like, I will remember that for the rest of my life. When I was a line prosecutor here in Seattle, I prosecuted someone who was accused of sexually assaulting his 3 young cousins. And each of the 3 victims, who were 10, 12, and 13, I believe, had to testify.
Wow.
And the oldest of the victims was effectively a mute. Like, she didn't really talk much. She had some developmental issues and trauma associated with that crime. And when I called her to the stand, I wasn't sure if she was going to say a word. And she got up there and she told her story and got through it. And it was like she was my kid. I felt so proud of her in that moment to be able to confront what had happened to her. So in an individual case, like those 2 cases were something that will last forever. On a broader issue, when I was, I was Governor Inslee's general counsel for 4 years. My first day on the job, we started working on the death penalty moratorium, and he put me in charge of reviewing our death penalty system in Washington State, doing case analysis for him. He had a lot of concerns about the racial disparities in the death penalty, and I just spent 10 months getting up to speed and educating him and visiting death row and Walla Walla State Penitentiary. And a year into my job as general counsel, the Governor Inslee put a moratorium on the death penalty. which had not been done in Washington State before. And I think that the death penalty should never be used anywhere in any state or by any government. And because of that work, I don't think we'll ever see the death penalty ever again in Washington. And so that wasn't an individual case, but my work as a lawyer, I think was really, really important in getting Washington on the path towards justice in that particular issue.
So let me also ask you this: with dealing with all of those heavy things, you know, like you have a heavy job. Okay.
Yeah.
My backpack is heavy, but your job is heavier. So how do you decompress, recenter, like feel free and relaxed? Like, how does Nick Brown let his shoulders down?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, like, my job is great. Like, I have the best job as a lawyer could have. And even though we're dealing with hard issues and issues that feel important, I get a lot of joy coming to work. And not everybody can say that,
That's
you know?
dope.
So I'm very grateful for the fact that I have a job that pays my mortgage and that I love. And I always tell people, don't mess with happy, you know? So you find something happy, like,
It ain't broke,
you know,
don't fix it.
embrace it. And so even though it's hard and weighty, like I do this job every day. Outside of work, I have 2 kids. You know, I'm trying to do everything I can to be the best dad. And so right now I'm soccer coach dad and Girl Scout cookie selling dad and Cub Scout dad. And that brings me a lot of joy. I try to get outside a lot. So I'm running, you know, at least every other day when it's dark 30 outside, and getting up to the gym as much as possible. And that, you know, I just put my earphones in and just not think about things for a while. And that's a good release for me. But between work and kids and that's pretty much all I got time for.
What would you say is one misconception of being a U.S. attorney?
That's a good question. I think there's both on the job and the authority. On the job piece, people often think of our ability to solve problems as broader as they can be. And so some of the things I touched upon earlier, we are a small piece of the justice system, and not everything is a violation of federal law. So we only prosecute federal laws or defend the United States against federal issues. And so the job is important, but also narrow in terms of the impact we can have on all these other justice-related issues. And my authority within that is pretty broad. And so I've been surprised how much power we have in this narrow space to operate. But I also find that a lot of people don't really know what the Department of Justice is. Like, we know D.C., and if you ask somebody about DOJ or department, you might know who the Attorney General is. If you ask people in Seattle, like, what does the U.S. Attorney's Office do? They're like, oh, I don't really know. They might have
That's a
seen me
good
in the
question.
news, you know, these days, or press conferences. But a lot of people have misperceptions about what the work actually entails and what my team does. And, you know, I don't have cases anymore. Like, I lead the office. I set the policy. I do a lot of the outreach and the community work for the office. But I have tremendous staff in my office, professional staff, legal assistants, paralegals, and lawyers who are out there grinding, underpaid, and they're doing it because they want to make this a better place to live. And, you know, it sounds cliche, but, like, that's really what the work is. Because our courthouse is right next to Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Everybody on my staff could walk across the street and double or triple their salary, and that is the legal assistant or the lawyer. And the fact that they're not doing that means something to me. And you know, they're sacrificing their bank accounts to help people and to try to make this community a little bit better. And so, but we want to try to spread awareness about what we do, because not a lot of people actually understand what the work entails.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, shoot, that was my last question. Is there anything else that you want the residents of Washington to know?
No, I thought you might ask about Survivor at some point, but that's good.
I was
I'm
trying
glad.
not to. I read in an interview that you hate when people make that the first
No.
question.
I hate
and I was
that.
like,
Some other
I
time.
was like, I'll just ask him something about it off camera. It's not that serious.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to come in and have a dialogue, and I think it's important for folks in the community to know who we are, to know that the work that we're doing. And I want our work to be informed by what the community is telling us. Like, I have an idea of what justice looks like or where the priorities should be, but I'm just one person, and it's important for people to feel like they know who the U.S. attorney is or who my line prosecutors are. So thanks for letting me come in and have a dialogue. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks for telling us some more about what happened on Monday, because I was like, I didn't expect this. Hold on. Let me remix the whole interview. I have questions now.
That's a big deal.
Definitely hoping that we're able to, get a little bit closer to the ceiling of fixing this problem. But like you said, I definitely agree that there's a lot more than just prosecuting the bad guys at this point. Like, we really have to figure out, like, okay, this person is doing this for pain. How can we get them proper prescription?
Yeah.
This person is doing this because they're depressed. Maybe they lost their job. How do we get them a therapist?
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, or maybe in a gym, working out actually really sometimes relieves so much stress.
Yeah. And people with those type of problems, they don't get healthy in prison.
Yeah. No. I've seen the food.
Yeah.
I watch a lot of shows, and I'm like, I definitely I couldn't do that. But shoot, until next time, hopefully by the time we meet again, you've gone down to Pike Place, it's finally nice.
You gotta come with me,
We can make it.
Yeah.
I'll put on like a little
raincoat.
I was thinking a plastic garbage bag or something, but something just to make sure I protect myself. But, well, shoot, you guys, until next time, hopefully, you had an amazing watch of this interview. Hopefully you learned some new things about what's going on around here, and also learn some more things about our U.S. Attorney, Nick Brown. So, look, until next time, you already know what I'm going to say. Make sure you have an amazing rest of your day, and, of course, keep that energy high.